Hello there, I'm Black Bright News, and in Caribbean and Africa, there's a reparations movement going on, and it looks like Britain is pretending otherwise. That's according to The Guardian today. So let me just, I'm writing this book, and I'm taking excerpts out, on things that affect our history. And I haven't got much time today, so I am going to read it pretty quickly. But hopefully you'll get the gist. When the headline reads, "In the Caribbean and Africa, a reparations movement is growing, so why is Britain pretending otherwise?" it doesn't feel like an accusation hurled across the Atlantic. It feels more like someone standing still, looking back, realizing the person behind them has stopped walking and asking quietly, "Why aren't you moving?" Because what this headline is really about is not reparations alone, it's about time, or rather, the strange sensation that time is moving everywhere else, while here in Britain it seems to stall. Conversations repeating themselves, arguments circling familiar drains, progress promised but never quite arriving. The world speaks, Britain responds politely, and nothing changes again and again and again. In the Caribbean and across Africa, the reparations movement has matured. That matters. This is no longer framed as raw grievance or moral appeal. It is organised, researched, legally literate, economically grounded. It speaks in numbers, policies, proposals. It names outcomes, debt relief, institutional repair, investment in education and healthcare, restitution of stolen cultural assets. It does not ask Britain to feel bad, it asks Britain to be responsible. And Britain's response has not been to argue or even to refuse. It has been something more elusive, a performance of not hearing. Not hearing is different from not knowing. Britain knows. It has always known. Parliamentary records, shipping logs, compensation rolls, balance sheets. The evidence isn't hidden. What has been perfect instead is the way of standing in the presence of speech without absorbing its force. A cultivated deafness, because if you're not listening, you cannot hear. If you cannot hear, you cannot answer. And if you do not answer, you cannot be held accountable. This is where the sophistication of the English language takes centre stage, not as poetry, not as beauty, but as instrument. English is uniquely skilled at smoothing edges without removing impact. It can acknowledge without admitting, it can sympathise without conceding, it can gesture towards responsibility while never quite touching it. Slavery occurred, colonies were established, wealth was generated, harm was done. The sentences are elegant, the grammar impeccable, and yet the central questions by whom, for whose benefit, and at whose costs quietly dissolve into a passive voice. This is not accidental. This language was refined alongside empire law and administration. Britain did not govern vast territories through rage or volume. It governed through paperwork, phrasing, minutes, correspondence. Power learned to seem reasonable, and reasonableness, when mastered, becomes an extraordinary shield. So when Britain says reparations are complex, that the issue requires careful consideration, that we must avoid imposing present-day values on the past. It sounds wise, measured, responsible, but functionally what this language does is slow time. It turns urgency into process, it transforms claims into conversations, it absorbs pressure without yielding ground. The intended outcome has always been controlled without confrontation. Time is bought, momentum is diffused, responsibility is spread so thin it evaporates. No single actor is accountable because the issue is historical, collective, contextual, endlessly nuanced, and all the while the material benefits of that history remain intact, inherited, unquestioned. This is why it feels to so many listeners like nothing ever moves. It's not that arguments are weak, it's not that evidence is lacking, it's not that moral clarity hasn't been reached, it's that the terrain itself has been engineered to prevent arrival. The conversation is allowed to exist endlessly as long as it never hardens into obligation. And there's something psychologically revealing here. Listening would require Britain to complicate its self-image, to accept that its story of fairness, restraint and moral leadership exists alongside extraction, violence and enduring inequality. Silence preserves innocence. Not hearing protects identity. But the world Britain is refusing to hear has changed. In the Caribbean and Africa, the conversation has moved from petition to position, from asking to stating, from moral appeal to structural claim. And when Britain continues to respond as though the issue is theoretical, emotional, or premature, the gap becomes visible. What once looked like prudence now looks like evasion. This is why the headline doesn't shout. It simply asks why Britain is pretending otherwise, because pretending is now exposed as performance. The language no longer convinces those outside the room, and increasingly it no longer convinces those inside it either. For people in the UK, especially those struggling, those already feeling abandoned by power, this conversation can trigger unease, a fear that accountability means blame, that justice means subtraction, that someone else's repair will come at their expense. But this fear itself is a product of the same linguistic fog. Britain has been extraordinarily effective at disconnecting global injustice from domestic inequality, as though the two stories have nothing to do with each other. Yet the system that extracted wealth abroad also concentrated it at home. The logic that dehumanised others also hollowed out communities here. Reparations at its most honest is not a moral punishment, it's an economic correction. A recognition that inequality has a history and histories can be addressed. And this is where the global movement is quietly stripping English of its hiding places. Legal claims do not respond to eloquence, policy frameworks do not defer to tone, economic models do not dissolve under politeness. They require clarity, and clarity collapses all those elegant detours into unavoidable questions. Who benefited? Who lost? What remains unresolved? What repair looks proportionate? Britain's mastery of language has long preserved hierarchy without naming it. Those who speak calmly arbitrate. Those who speak urgently are dismissed as emotional. The imbalance is reinforced even in dialogue that pretends to be equal. But this only works as long as people mistake civility for justice, and that spell is breaking. What we are witnessing now is not the failure of reparation movements, it's the exposure of strategy that once worked beautifully and now works less well by the day. Endurance was the goal, delay was the method. Silence was the shield, but silence is no longer neutral. It has become a statement. So when listeners feel that time stands still, that progress is endlessly promised but never delivered, that conversation loop without resolution, that feeling is not imagined, is produced carefully, skillfully, deliberately. And here's the quiet truth beneath the headline. Anything produced can be dismantled. The world is no longer waiting for Britain to feel ready. It is moving, organising, accounting, remembering. And the question now is not whether Britain will be forced into this conversation, but whether it will enter it with integrity, choosing to listen, not because it must, but because it finally understands that accountability is not the enemy of dignity. Pretending not to hear once preserved power, now it simply reveals fear. And the longer Britain stands still, the clearer it becomes that history has not stopped. It has just stopped asking politely. So, I hope you managed to get all of that. It was very difficult to condense all my findings into a 10-minute slot, and especially to kind of speak eloquently when I've got this darn cough. And I'm having to kind of control it so it doesn't spoil the video. But anyway, thank you for seeing with me. Thank you for being patient. Thank you for sticking with me. And these topics are various and they cross the gamut. I hope some people somewhere find them interesting and informative. And yes, I always try to do it from a UK perspective, even though they sound quite distant, as though they belong somewhere else in another country somewhere. I always try to bring it home so we can actually relate. Anyway, That's all I've got to say for now. I hope you have a wonderful evening. You take care of yourselves, and I'm going to say goodbye for now. You take care now.